Let's throw another one out there, and that is Rob Bradford, who's presented by McFarland Energy, the region's most dependable provider of home heating oil, including bioheat, as well as expert HVAC services at McFarlandEnergy.com. Mr. Bradford, McFarland to you, sir.
Yeah, let's throw one more name out there. McFarland,
Yes.
fellas.
Another one, of course.
Good to hear from you. Good to hear from you guys.
You heard we were just discussing this quote from Craig Breslow today. We'll get to the actual team and some of the things that went on this weekend. But when you hear a quote like that and then read a quote like that, I guess, about how, now that you have cost-controlled homegrown talent, now we can finally go out and spend. Do you believe that that's something that's now going to happen, that this organization and their philosophy is now going to be geared towards spending more?
Well, this isn't the first time we've had a GM say this. Actually, the last GM said the exact same thing. I remember doing a podcast with him, that's Chaim Bloom, and talking about the Mookie Betts thing. And now this part is going to make you cringe, but one of the reasons they said that they weren't willing to go to the lengths that they needed to go to with Mookie was that they didn't feel like they had the farm system in place. And that's a sort of a thing with a lot of organizations. If you look at long-term deals and you talk to the GMs, they'll say, well, yeah, we were able to sign Mike Trout to that. We were able to sign Manny Machado, Bryce Harper to that, because we felt like we were in a good position with our farm system to have control. And that's what Chaim said back then. And then when the Devers thing comes up, he says exactly this. Oh, yeah, we're in a much better situation. We feel like we can do it. All right, well, that's all well and good, but you got to do it. I mean, I think there is an element to that, but you got to do it. This is how these guys look at these rosters, that you have the controllable guys for a long, long time, and then you make the big ticket item. But until they get the big ticket item, they've lost the benefit of the doubt in terms of getting that.
So are you optimistic or pessimistic heading into the offseason?
Oh, I think it's going to be a wild offseason. I think it's not only because I do think that they're probably going to spend more, which, I mean, how can you not spend more than they did before? But because they are going to have to trade guys, which they do not necessarily want to trade. In other words, they're going to be dealing from positions of strength because they're just too left-handed heavy because they need guys at different – they need to turn over. The roster is not – there's a lot of mismatched pieces on this roster right now. And it's not to say like they have terrible players. I'm even talking about the guys coming up. Look at him. Marcelo Meyer plays shortstop. And Trevor Story, no matter what you think of him, he's going to be the starting shortstop. So you have to factor all of that, second base, outfield, all those lefty hitters, all of it. It is going to be, to me, more like and I don't remember a situation the Red Sox being in where it is so definitive you have to make good baseball trades for guys that you need, and you're going to give up guys that you don't want to give up. So that's why I think it's going to be fascinating. And then, like I said, I mean, they're going to spend more money because it's almost impossible not to.
Yeah, well, that'd be nice. And it's also nice if they actually go out and chase elite talent. They spent money on Lucas Giolito last year, Bradford, but I mean, I think we were all hoping for a little more than that. And, you got 4 prospects that everyone is expecting is going to be on the Major League roster in some form or fashion next year. Between Anthony, Meyer, Campbell, and Teal, out of those 4, how many of them realistically do you think are going to make impacts on the roster next season?
I think that you have Campbell. I think Campbell will. If you're going to pick one guy who is going to break with a team, potentially break with a team coming out of spring training, and listen, we've seen everything get derailed with bad spring trainings before, but the position fit and the progression and the experience in terms of what led him to this, I think you're talking about Campbell. And so I think that's the guy potentially at second base to say, okay, he fits here and he can play maybe a little bit of outfield as well. Teal is another guy. He hasn't had a great run in AAA, but he's at that age where you can have another guy there. You don't have to play him every day. With Anthony, same thing. I think that Anthony's the one where you're going to have to figure out what they do in the offseason because lefty hitting Durant, lefty hitting Wilyer Abreu. You have all these guys, so it's not like you're just going to run out all lefties. They're going to hang on to Roman Anthony. I just don't know if he's going to break with the team. We'll see. And then Marcelo Meyer, it's going to be really hard for him to break with the team out of spring training considering you have a shortstop and also considering you've lost a month and a half here at the end. So, I think that's sort of my power ranking in terms of immediate impact. But make no mistake about it. All 4 of those guys, if they aren't contributing in some way at some time in the Major League season next year, then there's going to be some concerns.
As much as we are turning the page to the offseason, the season is not actually over. Well, technically not over. And there was some interesting baseball this weekend. Obviously, all the stuff that went on with Cole and Devers and Bayo and throwing and Judge. Was Alex Cora really, truly pissed off, or was he trying to latch on to something that he thought might be one last-ditch stick of dynamite to ignite his team toward the postseason?
I think both. I think, honestly, both. And I hope that's not a cop-out answer, but I truly believe it. You know, Andy, like when you're in the middle of the dugout, like a lot of this stuff is nonsensical, right? You're in the middle of it. You get upset. Everyone's getting upset. And so I think that they were genuinely upset about it. But at the same time, once it happened, all you had to hear was a quote from Alex Cora saying, hey, look, if we might look back at this and say this is sort of the T-shirt. He didn't say this because this is a far better line than what he said. But this is a T-shirt this is a T-shirt cannon that's going to set us to going the rest of the way and make us make our run. So that dynamic was not lost on Alex Cora, certainly. And let's be honest. You needed to do something. Like, you've needed to do something. I've said this a million times since July 5th. It's amazing to me this team has only won more than 2 games in a row once. That's incredible. The Oakland A's have had more 3-game winning streaks. So they know that you needed to do something to find one of those winning streaks. And I thought that maybe that was sort of after the fact, maybe that was something he was going to latch on to.
Bradford, what do you think was more of an aberration, those couple of months before the All-Star break or everything we've seen since the All-Star break? Because it's two sides of the spectrum there, and you're talking about a 500 team right now.
I think that after the All-Star break, I think you can pin it. And listen, they've had bad runs offensively. They've had bad runs in starting pitching. But I think that before the All-Star break is a case of after the first month and a half where the starting pitching was just carrying them, it's best case scenario. This is what this team can be, best case scenario. And that's great. But how many times do you get best case scenario? And where it wasn't best case scenario was immediately after the All-Star game. I mean, the first game after the All-Star break, and that was the bullpen. Like, they had 2 guys hurt, and Justin Slayton and Chris Martin, who were 8th-inning guys. They didn't fill in. They were counting on guys that couldn't step up at that time, and they got guys at the deadline that did absolutely nothing. They weren't able to fill that gap at all. And you look at the numbers for the Red Sox bullpen since the All-Star break compared to the rest of the major league, it's not only last, it's not even close in terms of OPS against and batting average against and ERA and all of that stuff. And so if you're going to pick one thing, it's like what derailed them, it's absolutely that.
Going back to Alex Spear's article, another quote that caught my eye in there was, it was sort of in the long going over regrets of how you handled last offseason and the trade deadline and various things. And Breslow said, I'm sure Alex has some of those where he looks at pitching changes he did or didn't make or pinch hitters he did or didn't use. Do any of those pop to your mind? Do you have a list of questionable Alex Cora decisions from this year that could have made a difference?
Yeah, well, the Criswell one.
I was going to say, there's one big one.
Listen, that's much like we jumped to the Kyle Bearclaw game from a couple years ago. You know, we jumped to the Criswell one, and you could say, well, it's one game. The guy's pitching a perfect game, and then you bizarrely bring in Rich Hill back to back after he's been thrown in Cooperstown Field, a week before, and not only because it was a bad decision. It was also like it was a bad decision how they got to the decision, but also in the bigger picture, if we're talking about, the chances the Red Sox have, well, that was a huge game. I mean, that game was, I believe it was against Detroit, right? So it was you lost the tiebreaker with Detroit. So now instead of 2.5 back at Detroit, you're 3.5 back because you don't have the tiebreaker. And I think at that they lost that game because of that decision. So I think Alex Cora has still had a really, really good year overall, because I'm not going to say that this collapse. I mean, a lot of times he was dealing with bullpen situations, which was there was nothing there. But absolutely, if you want to ask me one situation, that would jump to mind.
All right, Bradford, before we let you go, which team do you think comes out of the American League and represents the AL in the World Series this year?
That's the thing. It's such a crappy American League, right? I mean, it's so it's like even I want to say the Yankees, but without, Four-Finger Cole, it's like what are you're swimming upstream without that sort of starters. Like right now, I'm with the Dodgers right now, and the Dodgers are this team like they're obviously unbelievably talented. But I'm talking to one of the writers like, okay, who's starting in the playoffs? And he's rattling off guys that get to 3 and then nobody else. I mean, I think this is how it is across baseball, really, especially the American League. But still, I guess I'll go with the Yankees just because I think that they can probably piece it together starting pitching-wise, and I like everything else about their team.
All right, we'll leave it right there. Rob Bradford from Southern Florida, I guess. You're gonna head up to Tampa before game time, or are you just hanging out with the Dodgers?
Yeah, man. No, I'm just getting some stuff done with the Godfather Joe Kelly's coming off the IL here, and but I'm trucking on up to Tampa, and so shockingly, there's an enormous Japanese media present here in Miami as Shohei Ohtani approaches 50-50. Which, by the way, like, how do you not vote for him for MVP? Like the guy's gonna be 50-50. I don't care what he does. So anyway, another time. Jalen Reagor got released, so
yes,
all these guys
we got to get back to that. Thanks so much, Rob Bradford, for the time. We'll talk to you again next week, sir.